muito mais coloridas e sempre mais caras. Elas geralmente voltam ao patamar de preço da máquina que eu comprei há um ano atrás e que já não serve para mais nada, segundo me apresentam os vendedores dessa indústria maravilhosa. E sempre, até quando aqui o dólar e o nosso dinheiro eram mais ou menos para, eram $1.500, algo assim, uma máquina que diziam, não, esta agora é a que você precisa comprar para começar a entrar no circuito. Então a minha pergunta é a seguinte, será que a indústria de informática, que evidentemente ganha muito dinheiro ao trocar uma máquina que eu uso hoje, daqui a um ano, não está menos interessada em torná-la amigável do que torná-la mais potente, mais bonita, mais rápida e, portanto, mais cara?
Well, I will be the first to admit that in the past 5, maybe even 10 years, the truth is that computers have become harder, not easier to use. They're more frustrating. They're more unreliable. And this is a very peculiar change. If 10 years ago you had asked me to predict a world where consumers spent $1,000 or $2,000 on a device which would reduce them to tears probably once a day, I would never have predicted that. And if I did, you would say that I was being very cynical. Okay? But that's basically what's happened. And we're at such a breaking point that I think people are furious. People are angry at that. And companies know it, and they're going to work much harder to make easier to use machines, more reliable machines, and lower cost machines. And simplicity will become very much a feature. And what's happened in the past 10 years, to be very honest, is that we keep adding options and we keep adding, and the software gets fatter and fatter and fatter, and suddenly we have this fat, obese software which keeps tripping on itself. And we're in a very funny point in time, and it's not just the complexity, but the complexity starts interfering with something that you thought was very easy. You did it a few days ago, it worked, and suddenly today it's not working. And you say, well, I must be stupid or something's wrong. You're not stupid at all. It's become sort of a very desperate situation, and it'll change. I promise you it'll change. Of course, kids don't care, which is another advantage.
Professor,
Yes.
a Agência Nacional de Telecomunicações, que é a agência nacional que regula a indústria da mesma maneira que nos Estados Unidos a FCC, está no processo de permitir, através das linhas de cabo da TV paga, o acesso dos provedores de serviços de internet. A regra do jogo, aparentemente a ser estabelecida, é que, embora a indústria do cabo no Brasil tenha dois grandes jogadores nessa indústria, na verdade, um muito mais forte que o outro, são duas empresas que têm o controle da indústria do cabo no Brasil, essas duas empresas terão que dar passagem a qualquer provedor de internet por um preço considerado razoável. Bom, nos Estados Unidos, como o senhor sabe melhor do que ninguém, existe hoje uma pendência que talvez marque a história da indústria, que é o fato de que a AT&T comprou a TCI, que é uma empresa de cabo, a AT&T, uma empresa de telefone, comprou a TCI, que é uma empresa de cabo, está comprando a Media One, que é outra empresa de cabo, e dona de oleodutos ou dutos para passagem de empresa de internet e telefone, a AT&T disse que aqui no meu duto não passa ninguém. E aparentemente a Anatel americana está dizendo que a AT&T tem razão. Quem é que tem razão? A Anatel americana ou a Anatel brasileira?
Well, first of all, you have to remember why AT&T bought the cable companies. And the primary reason was to be in what's called the local loop, which they were not part of. That was an area that until then they didn't have access.
Para o telefone?
Yes, didn't have.
Telefone.
Yeah. Well, they wanted to be in the local loop for anything, and then they'll use the cable for telephony, as well as other things. So when you come to the problem from that point of view, and you have actually now bought TCI and other things, Media One, obviously it's in your self-interest to try and keep that to yourself. But it's not going to last. You know, that will have to be deregulated, and eventually it's going to have to be an open pipe. And whether it's a physically open pipe or there are other paths into the home through wireless or through some other things, these things will shake out in the market. But from a business interest, I can see exactly why they're arguing from that point of view.
Mas do ponto de vista do consumidor, então, a Anatel brasileira é mais democrática do que aparentemente a Anatel americana?
From the point of view of the consumer, the Brazilian position is clearly the more interesting of the two.
Marcelo.
Negroponte, às vezes eu tenho a impressão que a internet é muito parecida com uma motocicleta, né, que foi inventada, como se a motocicleta tivesse sido inventada. E ao invés da gente ficar falando das viagens que a gente faz com a motocicleta, a gente fica falando do pneu, do espelhinho, do motor, né? Então, já que você é uma das bolas de cristal mais disputadas do mercado, eu queria que você dissesse se a gente vai permanecer muito tempo ainda falando da moto e não da viagem que a gente faz com ela. E também gostaria, já que o programa deve terminar daqui a pouco, se você pode compartilhar os seus bookmarks, que conteúdos que te atraem hoje neste vasto mundo da internet.
Uma dica de viagem.
Dicas de viagem, exatamente.
Nossa moto.
Well, your question is very good, because clearly in the beginning stages of any technology, you focus on the technology. And it's probably true that in the early days of automobiles, people really focused on combustion and focused on, you know, issues and maybe even discussed them. And maybe people at that time maybe even talked about how many horsepower they had in their cars. And clearly as something leaks into the society, especially as rapidly as this has, the technology itself starts to become invisible. So what would be the ideal is for it to become so invisible that you don't even know it's there. So it's not a matter of measuring how many square inches of display or how many millions of instructions per second or how much memory or bandwidth that you have. And when we get to that point, you're going to find a world where people are using it now for entertainment, for communications, and for learning, for business, for all these, in a very seamless fashion. It's going to be just so much part of your way of life that you won't even know it's there. In fact, if you ask a 12-year-old child in the United States about the digital world or something like that, they'll look at you as if you're absolutely nuts. They'll say, "What are you talking about?" I mean, it's like asking about a fish about water or something. It's there. It's part of the environment. In fact, you don't notice it until it's missing, and then you'll notice it. And that is sort of the direction we're going. The trips that people take, to use your metaphor, the only thing we know about those trips is that they'll be very different. And that's sort of what's interesting about the digital world, is that we're going to sort of celebrate, if you will, differences, and that we're going to find ways of doing different things, and it's going to be, in my opinion, a much more interesting planet as people sort of are able to do these things and at the same time be part of a community and at the same time be very different and to amplify the differences.
Bookmarks.